Now, Ozito has a target market of hobbyist DIY weekend warriors, and they're not really trying to position themselves on the tool belt of professional tradespersons. So with that in mind, I'm talking about these drills from the point of view of a complete beginner, and just talk about some of the lessons and some of the incorrect assumptions that I had over the last few years as I was learning to use these tools for the first time. And so what particular drills and drivers am I talking about today? Well, first up I'm going to talk about the basic drill, then I'll talk about the hammer drill, and then I'll talk about the impact driver. And this one actually is quite a bit more technical than the other two types of drills. And so with that introduction out of the way, let's get into part one, the basic drill. And so this does not really need too much explaining. Just like all of the Ozito tools in the range, this can go into the drill, it can go into my jigsaw, it can go into my multi-tool, it can go into my grinder, it can go into my lawnmower. Now, for the drill, you basically press this in and then press the trigger and it spins like so. Or you can put it in the middle and this is kind of like a safety lock or a safety mechanism. Or you can put it in the other direction and then it spins in the opposite direction. And obviously the harder you press the trigger, the faster it goes. What can you put onto the end of this drill bit? Well, you can put bits in here that are infinitely small, or you can go up to 13mm wide, put whatever you need to put in, and then tighten it like so, and then it's in. Obviously, with this drill, you can use it for creating new holes, or you can use it for basically rotating any screw into an existing hole, like so. And so that's the basic functionality of it. And now we move on to this collar, which has all the numbers on it. What do these numbers mean? Well, this basically reflects the amount of torque power. And what is torque power? Well, to put it in very simple terms, it is the amount of rotational or circular force that will be applied to it. And so with that, why would you want to adjust your torque power? Wouldn't you just always want it to be on the maximum for whatever this battery can provide? Well, yes and no. Well, actually, more no. And the reason being for this is that sometimes you could be at risk of splitting woods. And the most common everyday example that you and I are most likely to come across is when we're assembling IKEA furniture. And so I'll give a bit of a live demonstration now of the differences between a high torque and a low torque. I'll put this on a high torque now at 18. Put the Phillips head screwdriver in. You put it on high torque, it's going to go all the way in. However, if you put it onto a low torque, this will actually prevent you from applying too much force. I'll put this onto a 1 level force, and let's just say you wanted to apply a bit of force now. What will happen is that you'll find that it's refusing the turn. So this will actually prevent you from accidentally splitting the wood, which is actually kind of a handy feature. And so you'll notice when you're putting IKEA furniture together, it recommends to use a screwdriver and not a drill. Yeah, that is the sole reason why this is the case. And so if you do want to be using a drill and you don't want to be doing a million turns with your wrist to get all the screws in, you can just put the torque down to a very low setting, and then you will be able to put your IKEA furniture together without any risk of splitting the wood. And so that's pretty much everything I've got to say about the basic drill. And now I'm going to move on to the hammer drill, which is very similar to this basic drill, except there's a few additional features. And so with this hammer drill, it is slightly heavier than the basic drill being 1.07 kilograms, whereas this one's 1.12 kilograms. And just like the basic drill, you can get up to 13mm connections, and you can put in a large variety of drill bits just through this adjustable collar. And just like the other drills, well, you can spin 1,500 times per minute. And so I'm not going to repeat the points about the basic drill where this is the same. I'm now going to move on to the points of difference with this drill. And the first one being is that you have this adjustment for the torque force here, but then behind it you have another collar, and this has different little pictures on it. And so this is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you have a picture of a drill. I wonder what you'd use that for. Obviously drilling or creating new holes. Then you have the screw. Obviously you use that for screwing in screws to an existing hole. But now we'll get on to this hammer function. And so how does this kind of differ from both the screwing and the drilling in regards to the functionality? Well, there's only one use function that you'd ever use this, is if you're trying to create a hole into a porous type of material. And a porous type of material being something that's pretty much made out of concrete or rocks. So driveways, bricks, or things like that. Now if you'd use this function while you're trying to create a hole through wood, you would end up splitting the wood. So definitely don't do that. And so how exactly does this work? Well, it works by when it's actually drilling in, it creates these very sort of micro vibrations that sort of turns the rock or concrete material into a bit of a dust. And then it sort of breaks it up that way just through these like tiny little vibrational shocks that's basically too small for us to be able to see with the naked eye. And now let's ask the question, if budget is an issue, do you necessarily need to buy one of these? Well, unfortunately yes, because if you were to try and create a hole into a porous substance with a normal drill, I mean, yes, you can technically still create the hole, but it'll probably take you about 4 hours and you'll damage the drill and the drill bit. Whereas if you use this proper tool and the proper functionality, it'll probably take you less than 10 seconds. Unfortunately, as much as I'm all for saving money, you do have to buy the hammer drill if you're drilling into bricks or concrete. Now, I've seen people on TikTok do this whole thing where they'll be drilling away and then they get the hammer and they're doing this as it's drilling. Please do not do that. I mean, one, of course, it's obviously bad for the tool, but it's also useless. It's not effective at all because it's not the downward force that's actually breaking up the concrete. It's the sort of little tiny vibrations in all random directions that's actually breaking up the concrete. This actually does nothing. It's useless. And now let's move down the tool a little bit. You notice this little switch here, we have 1 and 2. And so what's this all about? Well, to put it in really simple terms, if you've ever driven a manual car, it's pretty similar to the gears. And so when you're in first gear, you have a lot more power, a lot more force. Whereas if you're in second gear, you won't have as much force, but you'll be able to go much faster. And so if you're using the hammer drill function, it relies on little micro vibrations. And so with that, you want to have the more vibrations, the better. And so it is better to be running this in second gear when you're using the hammer drill function. However, if you're trying to create a hole or put a screw into a very dense and strong material, you probably want it on the first gear, because when it's in the first gear, you have a lot more sort of circular force or rotational or torque force behind whatever you're trying to do. And for those of you that are very data driven and you'd like to know the exact amount of torque force that has been applied, the exact amount of torque force that this tool is capable of, 40 Nm, which is Newton meters of torque force. And so now that pretty much covers both the basic drill and also the hammer drill. And so now it's time to move on to the impact driver. So this impact driver is a very different tool to the previous two I just talked about. And so what is the primary reason for why you'd want one of this? Well, the primary reason you'd want this is if you had to screw screws into a very dense hardwood. If you're only working with materials such as pine, you probably don't need to bother getting one of these. You probably notice that this end piece looks very different to the other two drills. Well, the reason being for that is that you'll never need to create holes with this drill. This is only used to actually screw screws into existing holes. And so with that, basically everything will be able to fit on one of these types of connections. You just pop the collar out like so, slide in the connection, release, and then you're basically good to go. Just like the previous two drills, you got forward, safety, and backwards. And the exact specs for how big this connection is, in case you're a little bit worried about that, is that it is a 6.35 or 1/4 inch hex shaped connection that you can basically slot in and out of here in a bit of a hurry. And so it was before I mentioned that you probably only need to use this if you're working with hardwoods. There's a second scenario for which you'd need this as well, and that being is if you're still using soft woods, but for whatever reason you need to use a very big screw rather than your typical normal screw. In this situation, you might need the impact driver as well. The big point of difference with this impact driver as compared to a normal drill is that you may recall before that the normal drill has a torque force of approximately about 40 Newton meters. This thing has a torque force of 150 Newton meters. It is basically 4 times more rotational power than those previous two drills. And it achieves this extra torque power by doing these constant little micro shocks. And I know that sounds like a bit of a vibration function that the hammer drill has, but it actually works in a very much of a different way. And so the way this works is that if you imagine the anvil, which is basically the center spinning middle bit, it's spinning along. As it spins, what happens is it also presses into this little spring until it hits a certain point and then releases it and then gives it a bit of a little kick force. So it's kind of similar to trying to bust open a door by just constantly pushing against it versus shoulder charging it or jump kicking it. It's a very similar concept to that. It delivers these little shocks at a rate of 2,900 per minute. And so to really simplify the difference between these three tools, you've got the basic drill, which is good if you're a beginner and you're just using it for everyday simple tasks like putting IKEA furniture together, and you can use it for creating holes and also for screwing screws into existing holes. Hammer drill has all the functions of that basic drill, except you can also use it for porous surfaces. And the impact driver is not for creating holes, but just applying an incredible amount of spinny force or torquey force into a hole that's already been created. And so for these tools, what about proper care and longevity and so on and so forth? Well, it's all pretty common sense. I mean, don't kick them around, don't drop them, don't beat them and bash them. And also, every now and then, just get a leaf blower or some kind of air gun and sort of blow the insides around every now and then too. And so that's basically everything I have to say about Ozito drills and drivers. And so if I've missed anything, or if you've got your own worries or you've got your own interesting insights, please add it to the comments below. And otherwise, please stay tuned for next week when I talk about the Ozito multi-function tool. And then the week after, where I'll be talking about 511 backpacks.